2021, Futurist Jim Carroll from the virtual broadcast studio. My theme for 2021 is going to be reinvention, and I want to take a moment to take you on a voyage of what I have been through during the last year, a very calamitous, very tragic, very difficult, very complicated, very challenging year, to reinvent myself for the future. And it's truly a voyage where I've gone from a simple little broadcast studio with a small little camera to one of the world's most sophisticated virtual speaker products on the planet today. It's a voyage of reinvention, and it's a voyage of what I have done to ensure that, look, I can align myself for a world in which my reality is found in this virtual screen to take myself to clients around the world. In my previous life with events for organizations like the World Bank and Disney and NASA, the PGA of America, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, organizations seeking leadership insight. And we know we're not getting back to that world of in-person events anytime soon in 2021. We are in the world of virtual. And so my theory has always been, if I'm going to do it, I've got to do it right. And I want to take you on a voyage of how I started out with this simple little setup to where I'm putting out virtual broadcast events which look like this from my basement in my home using the magic of technology. We'll take you on a tour of reinvention. We'll take you on a tour month by month of what happened as I worked furiously to align myself to a new reality to such a degree that I've firmly reinvented myself for this world of virtual with videos which put in perspective what I am managing to accomplish down here through an absolutely fascinating voyage. Let's start out in the month of January 2020. I mean, my life was certain. I've been on the speaker circuit for 25 years. I've had full expectations that I would continue doing the type of thing that I was doing in many years previous. And so I found myself actually in Nashville, Tennessee at the start of the year for my very first event with one of the conference facilities, which I've spoken at many times, the Opryland Hotel. And this was for an agricultural conference. And I was there to provide insight on the future of agriculture. Now, maybe this was a harbinger of what was yet to come in the year 2020 because this early morning keynote, somebody actually threw up in the audience. It wasn't my content. It wasn't what I was covering. And many of the events I go into, people are massively hungover. They're not feeling well. And I think this poor fellow was caught up with that. But looking back on that, I mean, that had to be an omen for where we were going to go in 2020 with that type of start. At that point in time, I had a little virtual studio in my home. I was cutting promotional videos for client events. I was sending them to my overseas video producer where she could take the material that I filmed in front of this green screen and spice it up with production values so that clients had something they could share with their attendees before they got to the actual event. But it was really rudimentary. There wasn't a lot to it. It was 2 lights, a camera, a little stand. February happens. February, I found myself in one of my typical cities where I've spent a huge amount of time over the years, Las Vegas, speaking at a massive conference in the automotive industry, and specifically on the future of trucking, and specifically putting in perspective, how will the trucking industry, how will the automotive industry, how will the transportation industry change in the years to come? And I did a talk, 45 minutes in length, which put in perspective the very real trends. But already in my mind, I was starting to hear disquieting signs of what was going on. Like you, I was starting to hear the breaking news reports of what was unfolding and that there was something strange going on in our world with a new virus that was descending upon countries around the world. I began to realize that this was going to be far more significant than people were realizing early on. And by the time I got to March, I was already well on the pathway of focusing on my virtual broadcast studio. I was realizing, despite the fact that I had my very last event for a golf course industry association conference, a little preview clip of the promotional video which I put out for them before going on stage for the very last event in the first week of March, I realized that things were changing fast. And I was realizing that what I was going to have to do was I was really going to have to try to focus on what I could do from a virtual perspective, because the world of face-to-face events, meetings, conferences, leadership events clearly was going to come to an end. So I experimented with a lot of software, and I actually found a software solution called Ecamm Live. This is the very first clip from my very first test with the software. And this was about March the 7th, where I was down in my green screen studio working with a single Macintosh computer, trying to discover what I could do with this piece of software. I remember the day the stock market crashed. I came down, I found an appropriate video, I got in front of the camera, and I put out there a message going live to no one in particular, but I put a message out there that, look, we've been here before, we've been through an economic downturn, we have to focus on the fact that we can reinvent, we can innovate. History has taught us that those who innovate during a period of economic uncertainty are those who will win. I forced myself to come down to this broadcast studio every single day through that early period of time to film a little clip. In this particular one, I think maybe I was talking to myself. I was talking about the 7 stages of economic grief, where when we go through an economic downturn and economic shock like we were way back in March of 2020, we go through the anger stage, we go through the denial stage, we go through the bargaining phase. And my message to myself and to those who were following me on Twitter and Facebook was that, look, we need to move to the acceptance stage faster. But my presentation was really rudimentary. My camera quality wasn't very good. And what I was putting out there really wasn't a quality product, but it was a start. And I was determined that this was something I had to master. This was something I needed to figure out. So I forced myself to go down into my virtual basement, virtual broadcast studio every single day to film a little clip. April rolls around and the news is getting more disquieting. Things are getting more concerning. We're all obviously in a state of shock. We're all entering this world in which we are becoming zoomed out, and we're all realizing, we're in this green world. And in my case, very early on, I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to concentrate on using my green screen studio to develop the skills and capabilities that I required. And so I started investing in a little bit more equipment. I started investing in a little bit more technology. I started investing in some of the things that would help me to get a little bit better. And in order to continue along the path, I decided I needed to start a weekly broadcast show that I called Disrupting the Big Disruption. And here's one of the early little test clips where I was, going through the process of figuring out, how do I transition through slides? How do I bring that PowerPoint style stuff into big images on the screen behind me? I forced myself to go live weekly with a 1-hour show simply in order to figure out this technology and to continue going on the path of reinvention. To me, that's what it was all about. It was about reinvention. I had some early successes. I had an actual broadcast virtually to Australia one night at 8 p.m. with an early morning conference where I was talking about post-pandemic trends and what I thought I would see happen as we eventually found ourselves going through this very complex new economy. I was already starting to do some virtual client presentations, and again, I was down here every single day working with the technology, working with the concept of how do I innovate? How do I get up in front of a bunch of cameras in my basement where there's no audience, where there's nobody around? How can I develop the energy, the capabilities to actually do that? Because this is a very weird place to be, in all honesty. May rolls around. Obviously, we are really deep into the impact of what is going on with the pandemic. And my mindset at that point, I'm still continuing on with my weekly show, and I went a little bit overboard. I decided to explore using multiple camera angles. I decided to explore what could I do to have some long shots in the studio. And look, I was using some really lousy technology. I was using, in essence, some webcams. And what I was putting out there, I look back on it now, I'm really not proud of what I was doing. But I'm proud of the fact that I was working with it. Despite the fact that some of the results were horrific, I was going through the process of learning. I was following my own guidance that what you need to do to reinvent is you need to be willing to make mistakes. You need to be willing to fail. You need to be willing to do the things which might not yet work, but you are doing them simply to learn. And boy, I was certainly doing that down in the home broadcast studio with some of these early broadcasts, because the quality was really, really bad. But moving on from that, I decided that it was important to continue to try to get ahead. And I actually had a couple more client events during the month of May where I was able to bring in my trends insight. I was able to bring in my specific insight on particular industries. So one of the early ones had to do with the commercial real estate industry. How might commercial real estate change in the future? And I offered up to a global client group very specific insight on what we might see with commercial, industrial, and manufacturing facilities as our economy continued to go through some gut-wrenching twists and turns. It was a fast, also began innovating a little bit more in terms of the backdrops I was using. I was in the midst of exploring what can I do in front of this green wall. Inevitably, this led to some absolutely ridiculous moments where I discovered I could do some things which were just absolutely silly. If you wear a green shirt, you happen to disappear in front of the screen. And so I sent this particular video off to my sons. They said, "Dad, get a life. Don't ever share that. Here we are." Look, this is the ultimate geek toy when you're working with this type of technology. But what was happening was the studio was getting a little bit more sophisticated all the time. I found myself buying some better microphones, better lights, more lights. We ended up painting the wall green, actually, instead of using some green paper, because I was realizing this is where I was going to go. And by that period of time, I was already putting together a highlight reel, a promotional video for clients who were interested in seeing the type of work that I was doing down in the virtual broadcast studio. Even further into the process, we're even further into this new world. The news which is emerging around coronavirus continues to be complex, and everybody's realizing 2020 is going to be a heck of a year. Looking at pictures from June, it's obvious that I was building a space where I could actually have an office in the virtual broadcast studio by which I could invest the time necessary to taking myself forward. I was also investing in some professional level video equipment. I invested in two pretty good video cameras that I could use to enhance the quality of the images that I was putting out there. I continued to enhance what I could do in terms of lighting. I continued to enhance in terms of what I could do in the sound. Most importantly, I was continuing to innovate in terms of what I could do with the content. And that was innovation in terms of the backdrops. That was innovation in terms of how do we formulate and form information in a visual fashion that would capture the attention of people who are stuck inside a Zoom call. How do I bring my Jetsons story, which worked so well in Las Vegas for so many years, into a small screen format? So looking back at June, exploration, it was a month of exploration of different video backdrops. It was a month of exploration of different methods of getting insight out there. It was a month in which I just worked away at exploring what was possible in terms of so many different concepts. And that's where I discovered that what I was really doing down here was I had found a canvas of creativity. My virtual broadcast studio became my canvas of creativity by which I could take the insight that I was providing previously on stage around the world and compress it into a small screen format for this virtual world that we found ourselves in. But things really began to change when I found myself with a wide-angle lens camera, and I discovered that I could have a floor, and I discovered that if I went out and I bought some green carpet for the floor, and if I expanded the walls, I could actually do presentations which had me walking around the room. And look at this one, the very first presentation in which I had this walk-around capability in my home virtual studio, wearing sandals with bare feet. But that was a discovery that I could go so much further with the technology and what I was doing. So we roll around to July. I'm discovering I can do studio sets like this. I'm discovering I can really pump up the capabilities of where I'm going. And so the studio began to grow even more. And what I found myself having to focus on is if I'm going to walk around, how do I hit the right marks? Look, when I went on stage in Las Vegas in front of 7,000 people, I would have stage marks in terms of defining where I could walk, in terms of defining where I could work within the set that I had. And I was beginning to have to put those types of virtual marks into my virtual studio in order to get even better at my performance. I continued to innovate with all kinds of different virtual sets, simply to ramp up the professionalism of what I could do. I continued to innovate in terms of how I could bring contextual information into the shows and client events that I was putting together just simply to kick it up a notch, because I knew at this moment in time there were a lot of speakers on a similar trajectory in terms of reinvention. And a lot of them were simply sitting in front of bookshelves and putting out a product that was simply unacceptable for who we purport to be and the insight that we purport to bring to the world. I decided I had to do it better. I decided I had to have my floor marks to help to guide me around my virtual stage. I decided that I had to have professional level stage sets that people would simply look at and go, wow, I mean, this guy's onto something. Here's somebody who's doing something which we have not previously seen. We roll around to the month of August, and things are starting to get very real. I'm realizing that this is my life for quite some time to come. And we kept on pushing the studio further back into the basement, providing me more room, expanding my virtual stage in terms of capabilities. And what I really focused on during that month was, what can I do in terms of virtual presentation formats with a variety of formats for a whole bunch of different purposes, using them on my blog, using them for my daily inspirational quote, using them to repurpose for social media, repurposing them to tell a story that was unfolding. And during that month, I actually had a conference where I was speaking to several hundred teachers throughout the Midwest in terms of the impact of the future of education in the era of the pandemic. I was reaching out and doing more presentations, and was actually starting to put together some pretty sophisticated trends video to share with my clients, such as this one: what will we see in terms of post-pandemic trends as we eventually make our way out of this very surreal economic period of time. September rolls around. It's time to get real. To this point in time, I'd been using some marginal machines, a couple of old MacBook Pros, and I was really pushing the limits, and I was really starting to see some degradation in terms of the quality of what I was putting out there. So I went and I invested in a high-end iMac computer to give me the horsepower, to give me the capability to truly do what I could do in terms of production level quality. We rebuilt the studio. We tore it apart. We put it back together with the new machines, and really built a working space that would give me the facility with this canvas of creativity to do what I hoped to do. And that was to develop world-class capabilities in terms of simple production value. It's kind of fascinating looking back at the month of September, because one thing I did was I decided to put together a video clip which really pushed everything to the absolute max in terms of what I could do with my new technology. This particular video clip featured a whole series of different images where I'm in televisions, I'm in computers, I'm in laptops, I'm speaking from billboards, I'm speaking from highway signs, simply to emphasize the point that increasingly our world is virtual. We're living in this virtual reality. We might as well get really good at it. We might as well figure out how can we provide leadership insight in a way that is going to get beyond the Zoom boredom, which was encompassing so much a part of the world. So I had a lot of fun putting together this particular video clip. It was also proving to me that I truly had the horsepower to do some things that could be increasingly magical down here in the home broadcast studio. For a time as well, I also fooled around with the capability of how do I deliver PowerPoint presentations within the confines of my virtual broadcast studio. How could I have a screen inside a screen that is running a PowerPoint or keynote presentation with the type of material I would share in my old life? And in this particular video clip, I actually had two remote controls, one for the left, one for the right, one controlling my stage, the other controlling my keynote presentation. And I quickly decided this is getting a little bit too far. The breaking news was I was continuing to discover that I could deliver context-sensitive information. There would be particular innovation issues, trends issues, and I was finding that with the tools that I had at my disposal, I could come down here and I could film particular video clips simply to continue to get good and better at what I was doing that would put in perspective some issue that was unfolding in our world today. But I was also having an increasing number of client successes. A medical conference where I spoke about the future of healthcare, a medical accreditation conference where I was speaking about the future of medical health accreditation, an energy conference where I was speaking about the future of energy. What was happening here was clients that we had this guy, Jim Carroll, who has developed a virtual broadcast studio, which is letting him bring his insight in a way which is compelling, which grabs their attention. and which truly delivers it in a unique form. At that moment in time, I also decided that I was going to launch a new video series, Transformational Leadership. And what I would do is I would revisit previous keynotes that someone in the world and the lessons that we could learn from that key message as we went forward into the very first had to do with a keynote, one of two, which I provided for NASA several years ago, where I had a bunch of astronauts in the room, astrophysicists, people studying the origins of the universe, literally rocket engineers, and I was talking about the concept of transformational leadership. Specifically, the issue of what do leaders do during complex, challenging periods of time, and what lessons can we learn? This has actually become a video series which I continue to do because I think it gives all of us powerful insight on what we can do to align ourselves for a complex enemy going forward. I look back at these shows with some level of pride because by this moment in time, I was clearly coming to master the overall process of production value, the overall process of putting together a show, the overall process of doing something which shared concrete innovation, creativity, disruption, and trends insight, but in a compelling fashion. During this month, I found myself with more healthcare conferences and an additional conference focused on the future of energy. But what was really happening at this point in time is my stage sets were getting better. I also decided to kick it up a notch. To this point in time, down in the studio, I'd been filming in golf shirts and it really wasn't cutting it. I decided I needed to kick the professionalism up a little bit, put on a jacket, put on some proper clothing, simply to make it look even more professional than it already was. My stage sets continued to evolve. My stage sets continued to see innovation. I got more and more involved in terms of what can I do to bring a television style show quality to the productions that I was putting out there. Fascinating to look back at my voyage. It's fascinating to look back and see some of the things I was doing in terms of taking this virtual stage down in my basement in continuous stop basis, because I was convinced that what was happening was people were becoming zoomed out. If we are to engage and provide them leadership insight in this complex world, we better do it in a format which is going to grab their attention. There were some huge wins along the way. I filmed a particular video talking about the future of the meeting convention industry and the fact that we probably wouldn't be going back to face-to-face meetings for quite some time. And that actually was shared via social media throughout the industry on an absolutely massive way. And I realized with that people, when delivered a message that had powerful content formatted in a way that got the message across, whether it's video, whether it's text, whether it's a combination, that is something that would work in terms of grabbing their attention. It was a massive period of innovation. And by this point in time, I was discovering I can easily get in front of an audience, bring inside to this virtual event relevant, powerful trends, insight, whether to do with healthcare or topics such as how has the future of energy changed as a result of COVID-19. Well, November rolls around. And I'm realizing more and more, I'm here for another year. I'm not going to be back on a stage anytime soon. I might as well, continue to work away, have some fun, change my message. Let's build out the studio. And I had a whole other wall here. And I'm thinking, if I had more angles, if I had more cameras, if I had more capabilities, we could do so much more. So I convinced my wife and business partner, let's expand another wall. Let's put up more green paint. Let's expand the facility. Let's expand what we can do. The studio kept on growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Not only that, I got a desk. I discovered that what I could do down here was I could take the same technology that I'm using for my green screen capabilities and implement an actual desk. And the way this is done is it's an actual physical little desk with a green screen, bit of fabric on top of it. And through the magic of the program I'm using, you turn it into an actual desk. What I'm doing here is I'm continuing to explore the boundaries, continuing to discover what it is I can do to continue to expand this virtual world, to do innovative things in terms of taking my message to my clients worldwide. I also experimented a lot with different formats. How do I do something in terms of a cool black and white transition scene using that seminal moment from the movie The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy walks out the door and goes into a world of Technicolor. And I was experimenting with the same type of thing in terms of camera effects, in terms of capabilities, in terms of what I was doing, innovating in terms of overall style within the studio. December rolls around. The voyage didn't stop. Then I began thinking, well, how can I begin to bring actual physical, furniture and stuff into the home broadcast studio in order led to, for example, my snow show, where I actually had a little snowman as part of the set, where I actually had a scene where I'm sitting on a chair with a fake television next to me, which contains the text of the message that I'm getting across in terms of my keynote with respect to the Swiss Innovation Forum years ago. I'm continuing to discover the things I can do to ramp up the sophistication of the studio. It's an absolutely magical voyage. And I think what I'm really doing here is I'm discovering the marriage between the virtual world and the physical world in a virtual broadcast set. Not only that, the concepts that I began to explore in terms of content that I could bring to the world became even more magical. I interviewed Santa Claus during the month of December. Santa Claus too has gone virtual. They've had to go virtual. And I found a fellow in Rhode Island who was doing Santa Claus interviews from his trailer in his backyard in Rhode Island. I was filming such pieces as my end of year 2021 trends piece. And by this point in time, I think I'd clearly mastered my capabilities. I'd clearly mastered what I could do in terms of my tagline, virtual done right. If we're going to do virtual, we've got to do it right. If we're going to do virtual, we've got to have the capability to do this type of thing where we have visually appealing information, visually appealing sets with relevant content to provide insight to people in terms of where we need to go. I continue to innovate. I've just launched a new web email service called Screen Thoughts, which is a summary of some of the trends that I see along the way. Regardless of what is going on, it's all happening down here in my virtual broadcast studio, where I've got a whole bunch of technology, a whole bunch of capabilities, a whole bunch of software, a whole bunch of stuff by which I continue to innovate, change, and adapt in terms of what I can do as a global futurist, trends, and innovation expert. 2021, I fully expect that this is going to be my world for quite some time to come. I fully expect that much of what I will be doing in terms of client projects will be happening in my virtual broadcast studio. I fully expect this is my reality. It's been a huge amount of fun so far. I continue to innovate. I hope you stay tuned and continue to watch the progression. I think I've come a long way in but 12 months, and I'm looking forward to the next 12. That's it for now. Futurist Jim Carroll.